The night it happened didn't feel dramatic at first. It felt ordinary in the way disasters often do. Quiet, almost polite, like the moment before something breaks but no one in. The room is ready to admit it, and Lauren Mitchell sat at the dining table holding her fork in midair, staring down at a plate that still had half her meal untouched. The gravy. Beginning to cool, the vegetables going dull under the light, and across from her, her 8-year-old son Noah sat unusually still, his small hands folded in his lap instead of reaching for food the way kids normally do, his eyes shifting carefully from one face to another like he was trying to understand something adults hadn't said out loud yet. And the rest of the table carried on like nothing was wrong, her older sister Vanessa laughing too loudly at something trivial, her husband Brian nodding along without adding anything meaningful, and their mother dabbing the corner of her mouth with a napkin like she was hosting a perfect holiday dinner instead of what Lauren now recognized as something far more calculated. And it was strange how long she had ignored these moments over the years, how she had trained herself to smile through comments that didn't feel right, to laugh at jokes that carried quiet cruelty, because that's what you do when you grow up learning that love comes with conditions, that acceptance is something you earn. By staying quiet, by being agreeable, by not making things uncomfortable for others, and for years Lauren had done exactly that. She had been the easy daughter, the one who didn't demand too much, the one who adjusted, who adapted, who swallowed her feelings to keep the peace, but something about that night felt different, because for the first time, she wasn't just aware of the tension, she was watching it unfold with clarity, and clarity changes everything. Vanessa leaned back in her chair with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile that pretends to be calm but carries something sharp underneath, and she placed her fork down slowly, like she was preparing to say something important, and Lauren felt her stomach tighten slightly, not out of surprise, but out of recognition, because she had seen this before, the setup, the shift in tone, the moment where a conversation stops being casual and becomes something else entirely, and Vanessa tilted her head slightly. Before speaking, her voice smooth, controlled, "Lauren, we need to talk," and just like that, the room changed, the air becoming heavier, quieter, more focused, and Lauren placed her fork down gently, her movements deliberate, because she already knew this wasn't going to be a conversation where she would be heard, it was going to be a decision that had already been made without her. "About what?" she asked calmly, her voice steady despite the tension building inside her, and Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with their mother before continuing. "It's just, things have been difficult lately, and we all think it's better if you take some space," and the way she said it, the careful wording, the soft tone, almost made it sound reasonable, but Lauren heard what it really meant. Because space doesn't come with ultimatums. Space doesn't come with a child sitting silently at the table, watching adults decide where he belongs, and their mother leaned forward slightly, adding quickly, "It's not personal, sweetheart. It's just, we think it's best for everyone." And that was the moment something inside Lauren shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but permanently. Because there's a difference between being misunderstood and being dismissed. And this wasn't confusion. This was intention. And she glanced at her father briefly, hoping for something, anything. But he avoided her eyes completely, focusing instead on his plate like it required his full attention. And silence from someone who should speak is louder than words. And Lauren felt that silence settle deeply, confirming what she already knew. This wasn't a discussion. It was a decision, and she and her son were no longer part of it. Noah shifted slightly beside her, his small voice breaking through the tension. "Mom, are we leaving?" And that question, simple and quiet, carried more weight than anything else said that night. because it meant he understood enough to know something was wrong. And Lauren looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, everything became clear in a way it never had before. Because this wasn't just about her anymore, it was about what she was. Allowing him to witness what she was teaching him about his worth, about how people treat you, about what you accept and what you walk away from, and for years she had stayed. Endured, adjusted, believing that keeping the peace was the right thing to do, but now she saw the cost of that clearly reflected in her son's quiet, careful behavior, and that realization hit harder than anything her family could say, because it wasn't about them anymore. It was about him. Lauren stood up slowly, her chair scraping lightly against the floor, the sound cutting through the room in a way that made everyone pause, and she reached for Noah's hand. Her grip gentle but firm. "Yes," she said softly, "we're leaving." And Vanessa exhaled like she had been waiting for that exact response, her expression settling into something almost satisfied. "Good. I think that's best." And their mother nodded quickly. It'll give everyone time to reset, and the calmness in their voices made something inside Lauren almost laugh, because it was so detached from what was actually happening, so disconnected from the reality of telling your own daughter and grandson they didn't belong at the table anymore. And she felt her lips curve slightly, not in warmth, not in sadness, but in something sharper, something clearer. Because in that moment, she understood something she had been avoiding for years. She had been trying to belong in a place that had already decided she didn't fit. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. "Okay," she said quietly, and the simplicity of that response caught them off guard, because they had expected resistance, expected emotion, expected her to argue or plead or explain. But she didn't do any of that, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove, and she turned slightly, guiding Noah toward the hallway where his coat hung, and as he moved without hesitation, without confusion, just quiet acceptance, it confirmed everything she needed to know, because children don't question patterns they've already learned to recognize, and that realization settled heavily but clearly inside her, shaping what came next. As Noah disappeared briefly to grab his things, Lauren walked into the kitchen, her movements calm, deliberate, and she opened the cabinet near the counter, reaching for the envelope she had placed there earlier that day, hidden behind dishes like something she wasn't sure she would use, something she had prepared just in case. And as she held it in her hands, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her, because this wasn't about reaction anymore, it was about consequence. And when she walked back into the dining room, the conversation stopped immediately, all eyes shifting toward her, waiting, watching, expecting something they could dismiss. But what they got instead was something they hadn't prepared for at all. Lauren didn't rush, didn't raise her voice, didn't give them the reaction they were expecting. And that alone shifted the energy in the room in a way none of them could immediately understand, because people who are used to controlling a situation rely on predictable responses, on emotion they can dismiss, on arguments they can twist. But silence combined with calm intention is something far harder to manage. And as she stepped fully back into the dining room holding that envelope in her hand, she noticed the way Vanessa's expression flickered slightly, curiosity replacing satisfaction for just a second, and their mother leaned forward subtly, her attention sharpening as if she sensed something she hadn't accounted for. And Lauren stood there quietly, looking at each of them in turn, not with anger, not with pain, but with something steadier, something clearer. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she was standing in front of her family trying to earn a place at the table. She felt like she was standing outside of it entirely, looking in, seeing it for what it really was, and that distance gave her something she hadn't had before: control. Before we go, she said softly, her voice even, controlled, there's something I was going to give you tonight. And Vanessa let out a small, dismissive breath, leaning back, slightly as if preparing to brush it off before even hearing it. Lauren, this isn't the time for. But Lauren didn't let her finish, not rudely, not aggressively, just by. Continuing because interruption isn't always loud, sometimes it's simply not stopping. I brought something for each of you, she added, and she placed the envelope down on the table gently, her fingers resting on it for just a second longer than necessary before she slid it forward, and the room fell into a brief silence that felt heavier than anything that had been said so far, because uncertainty had replaced control, and uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. What is it? Their mother asked, her tone cautious now, curiosity creeping in despite herself, and Lauren looked at her calmly before answering. It was supposed to be a gift, and the way she said was instead of is didn't go unnoticed because Vanessa's posture shifted slightly, her attention sharpening as she leaned forward just enough to look at the envelope more closely, and Brian straightened in his chair, his expression changing from disinterest to alertness in a way that felt almost instinctive, like he recognized something valuable even before knowing what it was. And their father finally looked up properly, his gaze moving from Lauren to the envelope, and for a moment, no one spoke. Because they were all trying to understand what they were looking at, and that hesitation, that pause, gave Lauren exactly what she needed: time. Time to let the moment settle. Time to let their curiosity build. Time to shift the balance without saying anything else. Noah reappeared quietly in the hallway, his coat slightly too big for him, his backpack hanging off one shoulder, and he stood there watching, not interrupting, not asking questions, just observing. And Lauren glanced at him briefly, her expression softening for just a second before returning to calm focus. Because everything she was doing now wasn't just for her, it was for him, for what he would remember, for what he would learn from this moment. And she turned back to the table, her gaze steady. You told me to. Leave, she said simply, not accusing, not emotional, just stating a fact. And Vanessa nodded slightly, her tone firm again, trying to regain control. Because it's what's best. And Lauren gave a small, almost thoughtful nod, as if considering that perspective for a moment before responding. Then you won't mind me doing this. And the way she said it carried a quiet finality that none of them fully understood yet, but all of them felt. And before anyone could ask what she meant, she reached forward, opened the envelope, and pulled out 3 separate documents, placing them side by side on the table, each one labeled clearly with a name: Mom, Dad, Vanessa. And the room shifted instantly, because now this wasn't abstract anymore. It was specific. It was real. It was something tangible, sitting right in front of them. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly as she leaned forward further, scanning the top of the page without touching it, and Brian stood up halfway from his chair, trying to get a better look, and their mother reached out instinctively, her fingers hovering over the paper before pulling back as if unsure whether she was allowed to touch it yet. And there, Father finally stood up completely, his attention fully engaged for the first time that evening, and Lauren watched all of this quietly, observing, taking in every reaction, every shift, because this was the moment everything changed. Not because of what she was about to say, but because of what they were about to realize. What is this? Vanessa asked again, her voice tighter now, less controlled, and Lauren looked at her calmly. It's what I was going to give you tonight, she said, and then, after a brief pause, she added, before you decided I didn't belong here, And that sentence landed heavier than anything else she had said so far, because it connected the present moment to what they were looking at directly. And suddenly the papers weren't just documents anymore. They were something lost, something taken away, something they hadn't even known they had. Until now, and that realization created a tension in the room that felt almost physical. Brian reached forward first, unable to hold back his curiosity any longer, and picked up one of the documents, scanning it quickly, and his expression changed almost instantly. The casual indifference replaced by something sharper, something more alert, and he looked up at Vanessa with a mixture of confusion and urgency. "Vanessa," he said quietly, and that single word was enough to shift her completely, because now it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something else, something closer to alarm, and she grabbed the paper. From him, reading it herself, her eyes moving quickly across the page, and Lauren watched as the color in her face shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Enough to understand exactly what was happening, because the moment of realization is rarely loud. It's subtle, it's quiet, it's the exact second someone understands they've made a mistake they can't undo. This, this isn't real, Vanessa said quickly, but her voice lacked the certainty it had just minutes ago, and their mother reached forward again, this time actually picking up her own document, her hands moving faster now, her expression tightening as she read, and their father leaned over slightly to look at his silence breaking as he muttered, "This says," but he didn't finish the sentence, because he didn't need to, because they all understood now, all at once, and the room that had felt controlled and certain just moments ago now felt unstable, uncertain, and Lauren stood there, quietly, watching it unfold, not with satisfaction, not with revenge, but with clarity. Because this wasn't about hurting them, it was about showing them something they had refused to see before. "You were going to give us this?" their mother asked slowly, her voice completely different now, softer, uncertain, almost careful, and Lauren nodded slightly. "Yes," she said simply, and that single word carried everything, because it confirmed what they were thinking, confirmed what they were realizing, confirmed what they had just lost, and Vanessa looked up sharply. Her expression now completely changed, the earlier confidence gone, replaced by something far more urgent. "Wait, Lauren, we didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, her tone shifting in a way that would have felt manipulative before, but now just sounded desperate, and Lauren didn't react, didn't respond immediately, because there was nothing to rush anymore, nothing to prove. The moment had already done its work, and for the first time that evening, the power in the room had shifted completely, and they all felt it. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened, pressing down on everyone in the room, because now the truth wasn't something distant or hypothetical anymore. It was sitting right there on the table in front of them, undeniable, visible, and impossible to ignore, and Lauren stood there watching it all unfold with a calm she hadn't known she was capable of. Because this moment wasn't about anger, it wasn't about proving a point, it was about clarity. And clarity has a way of stripping away everything unnecessary until only truth remains, and what remained now was something her family had never expected to face, the reality that they had just pushed away the one person who had been about to change everything for them. Vanessa was the first to react properly, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the panic underneath as she flipped through the pages again, faster this time, like she was hoping she had misread something, like if she looked at it again it might somehow change. This amount. Lauren, this is. She stopped mid-sentence, because even saying it out loud felt too real, too final, and Brian stepped closer now, his earlier indifference completely gone, replaced by something sharper, something almost calculating. This is serious, he muttered under his breath, and that single statement shifted the tone of the entire room, because it confirmed what everyone else was thinking, but hadn't yet said. This wasn't symbolic, this wasn't emotional, this was real, and it was significant. Their mother's hands trembled slightly as she held the paper, her expression softening in a way Lauren hadn't seen in years, but this softness didn't come from love, it came from realization, from understanding what was at stake, and she looked up slowly, her voice quieter now, careful, almost cautious. Lauren, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? And the question might have sounded innocent to someone else, but Lauren heard what it really was. Not concern, not regret, but an attempt to shift the narrative, to make it seem like the problem wasn't what they had done, but what she hadn't said, and she held her gaze steadily, her response simple, I was going to, and the weight of that sentence settled heavily, because it placed responsibility exactly where it belonged, and no one in that room could avoid it anymore. Their father finally spoke again, his voice low, strained. You should have said something earlier, and Lauren almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable, because even now, even in this moment, they were trying to find a version of events where they weren't the ones at fault, and she shook her head slightly. Her tone calm but firm, no, I shouldn't have had to, and that response cut deeper than any argument could have, because it removed every excuse, every justification, every attempt to shift blame and left only the truth. They had made their decision without knowing everything, and now they had to live with it. Vanessa stepped forward suddenly, her earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by urgency. Okay, wait, this doesn't have to be like this, she said quickly, her tone shifting into something softer, more persuasive, the same tone she had used countless times before to smooth things over when it benefited her. We were just having a moment. Things got out of hand. You know how family arguments are. And Lauren watched her carefully, recognizing the pattern instantly, because this wasn't new, it was just more obvious. Now, the way Vanessa reframed situations to avoid responsibility, the way she softened her words when she needed something, and for years Lauren had accepted it, adjusted to it, believed it, but not anymore. No, Lauren said quietly, and that single word stopped Vanessa mid-sentence. Because it wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional, it was final, and finality is something people can't argue with the way they argue with feelings. And Vanessa blinked slightly, thrown off balance. No? She repeated, like she didn't quite understand what she had just heard, and Lauren nodded once, her expression steady. No, this is exactly how it is. And the clarity in her voice made it impossible to twist, impossible to reinterpret, and for the first time, Vanessa didn't have a response ready. Brian tried to step in then, his tone more practical, more controlled. Look, we're not saying we don't want you here, we just thought maybe some space would help, and Lauren turned her gaze to him briefly, not angry, not dismissive, just clear. You told me to leave and never come back, she said, and the way she repeated their exact words stripped away every attempt at softening, every attempt at rewriting what had happened, and Brian opened his mouth as if to argue, but then closed it again, because there was nothing to argue. The truth didn't need interpretation, it was already complete. Their mother stepped forward slightly now, her voice softer than before, almost pleading. Lauren, we didn't mean it like that, and that sentence might have worked before, might have softened her, might have made her question her own reaction, but now it only made things clearer. Because intention isn't what people say afterward, it's what they do in the moment, And in that moment, they had been very clear about what they meant, and Lauren shook her head slightly, her tone still calm, still controlled. You meant it enough to say. It in front of him, she said, glancing briefly toward Noah, who was standing quietly near the doorway, watching everything with wide eyes. And that single detail, that single reminder shifted the weight of the situation completely because it wasn't just about words anymore, it was about impact, about what had been said and who had heard it. And their mother's expression faltered slightly because there's no easy way to justify hurting a child, not when it's pointed out directly. The room fell quiet again, but this silence felt different from the one before because this time it wasn't confusion, it was understanding. Understanding that something had been broken in a way that couldn't be undone with apologies or explanations, and Lauren took a slow breath, feeling the moment settle fully, because this was it. The turning point. The moment where everything shifted from what had been to what would be. And she reached forward, calmly, placing her hand on the documents, and without hesitation, without drama, she gathered them together slowly, deliberately, and slid them back into the envelope, and the movement itself said everything that needed to be said. Because it wasn't rushed, it wasn't emotional, it was intentional. And intention is what makes actions final. Lauren, wait, Vanessa said quickly, stepping forward again, her voice now openly desperate, the earlier composure completely gone. We can fix this, we can talk about it, we. Didn't know, and Lauren paused for just a second, not because she was reconsidering, but because she wanted to make sure what she said next was clear, unmistakable, and she. Looked at her sister calmly. That's exactly the problem, she said, and the simplicity of that statement landed harder than anything else. Because it didn't accuse. It didn't argue. It simply pointed out the truth. They had made a decision without knowing, and that decision had consequences. And consequences don't disappear just because the situation changes. Noah stepped closer then, his small hand finding hers instinctively, and she squeezed it gently, grounding herself in that moment. Because everything she was doing now, every decision she was making, wasn't just about her, it was about him, about what he would learn from this, about what he would remember, and she turned slightly toward the door, her posture calm, her movements steady. We're leaving, she said softly, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, just quiet certainty. And as she guided Noah toward the hallway, the room behind her felt different, not powerful, not controlled, just unsettled, uncertain, and for the first time in her life, Lauren wasn't the one trying to fix it. Behind her, voices began to rise, not in anger, but in urgency, confusion, panic, and their mother's voice cut through it. Sharper now, Lauren, please, don't do this. And Vanessa added quickly, you're overreacting. This isn't worth losing family over. And Lauren stopped for just a second at the doorway, not turning around immediately, just standing there, letting their words settle. And then she turned slightly, her expression calm, her voice steady. No, this is exactly what it's worth, she said, and that sentence closed something completely, because it made one thing clear. This wasn't about money, it wasn't about documents, it was about respect, about boundaries, about what she was no longer willing to accept, and with that, she opened the door, stepping out into the cold night air, the quiet outside, feeling almost peaceful compared to the tension she had just left behind, and as she walked toward the car with Noah beside her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not happiness, but something stronger. Something more stable. Certainty. Certainty that she had finally stopped trying to belong somewhere that had never truly accepted her. And That certainty changed everything. The cold air outside felt sharper than it should have. But Lauren didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, because once a decision becomes clear, hesitation only weakens it, and she wasn't weak anymore. Not in the way she had been before, not in the way they had always expected her to be. And as she reached the car and opened the door for Noah, she felt his small hand tighten around hers just slightly, not out of fear, but out of something else, something quieter, trust, and that mattered more than anything she had just walked away from. Because for the first time, she wasn't choosing between keeping peace and protecting herself. She was choosing both, and that realization settled deep inside her, steady and unshakable. Behind her, the front door burst open, voices spilling out into the cold night, urgent, louder now, stripped of the calm control they had carried just minutes before. And Vanessa's voice came first, higher than usual, almost panicked. "Lauren, wait. Just wait." And Lauren closed her eyes briefly, not out of weakness, but out of recognition. Because this moment, this exact moment, was the one she had unknowingly waited for her entire life. Not the apology, not the validation, but the shift, the reversal, the point. Where the people who had always held power suddenly realized they didn't anymore. She turned slowly, not rushing, not reacting, just facing them fully one last time, and the difference in their expressions was immediate, visible, undeniable, because they weren't composed anymore, they weren't certain, they weren't in control, they were searching, scrambling, trying to find a way to undo something they now understood they couldn't. Their mother stepped forward first, her coat barely wrapped around her shoulders, her face pale, her voice softer but urgent. "Lauren, please. We didn't mean it. We were just upset. Things got out of hand." And the words might have sounded sincere to someone else, but Lauren heard the truth behind them. Not regret for what had been said, but regret for what had been lost. And she didn't interrupt, didn't argue. She just listened. Because sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation ever could. Vanessa stepped closer next, her earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something desperate, something unfamiliar. "You know how I get. I didn't think it through, I wasn't serious," she said quickly, her words overlapping, rushing, trying to fill the space before it closed completely. And Lauren watched her carefully, really watched her. Noticing the difference now, the way her tone shifted, the way her posture softened, the way everything about her changed when she needed something. And for years, Lauren had responded to that, had adjusted to it, had believed it, but now she saw it clearly, and once you see something clearly, you can't go back to misunderstanding it. Their father finally stepped forward too, his voice low, strained, carrying more weight than before. "Lauren, we're family. You don't walk away from family." And that sentence might have worked once, might have made her hesitate, might have made her question herself, but now it only confirmed everything she had already realized. Because family isn't defined by words, it's defined by actions, and their actions had already spoken louder than anything they could say now. Lauren stood there quietly for a moment, letting their words settle, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of it to be felt, and then she spoke. Her voice, calm, steady, final. "You already walked away from me," she said. And the simplicity of that statement made it impossible to argue. Because it wasn't emotional, it wasn't dramatic, it was factual, and facts don't bend under pressure the way feelings do. Vanessa shook her head quickly, stepping closer again. "No, no, that's not what happened. We were just trying to." But Lauren stopped her gently, not with force, not with anger, just with clarity. "You told me to leave. in front of my son and said not to come back, she said. And each word landed exactly where it needed to, because it removed every excuse, every attempt to soften what had happened, and left only the truth behind. Their mother's voice broke slightly then, her tone softer, almost pleading now. We were wrong, okay? We were wrong. We shouldn't have said that. We're sorry. And for a moment, just a moment, Lauren felt something shift inside her. Not enough to change her decision, but enough to acknowledge what was happening. Because this was the first real apology she had heard from them. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And she recognized it for what it was. Too late, she took a slow breath, her gaze steady, her voice softer now but no less firm. You're not sorry for what you said. You're sorry for what you lost, she said. And that truth settled heavily between them because they couldn't deny it, not fully, not honestly, and the silence that followed was different again, quieter, more honest, because for the first time, no one was pretending anymore. Vanessa looked down briefly, her expression tightening, and Brian shifted uncomfortably behind her. But no one argued, no one corrected her, because they all understood on some level that she was right, and Lauren let that moment sit, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, because some truths need to be felt, not just heard. She turned slightly then, opening the car door fully, helping Noah inside, and he climbed in without hesitation, his movements calm, trusting, and that trust grounded her more than anything else, because it reminded her why she was doing this, why she had to do this, and she closed the door gently before turning back one last time. I came here tonight to give you something, she said, her voice steady, and all of them looked at her immediately, hope flickering across their faces despite everything, and she held their gaze for a moment before continuing, not just money, but a chance to be something different, something better. And her words weren't angry, they weren't bitter, they were honest, and that honesty carried more weight than any accusation ever could. You chose not to take it, she added, and the finality in her tone made it clear that this wasn't something that could be undone, not with apologies, not with explanations, not with promises. Their mother stepped forward again instinctively. Lauren, please, we can fix this. We can start over. And Lauren shook her head slowly, her expression calm, almost peaceful now. No, I'm starting over, she said, and that distinction changed everything, because it made one thing clear. This wasn't about repairing what had been broken. It was about building something new, something separate, something that didn't depend on them anymore. She opened the driver's door and sat down, her hands steady on the wheel, and as she started the engine, she glanced at them one last time. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with clarity, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was moving forward, and that difference mattered more than anything else. As the car pulled away, she didn't look back, not because she was trying to prove something, but because she didn't need to anymore. And beside her, Noah leaned back in his seat, his voice quiet but certain. Mom, are we okay? And Lauren smiled slightly, reaching over to squeeze his hand gently. Yeah, we're more than okay, she said. And she meant it, because for the first time she wasn't trying to belong somewhere that didn't value her. She was building something that did. The road stretched ahead of them, quiet, open, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt like possibility. And now, I want to ask you something. If you were in Lauren's place, would you have forgiven them and given them another chance? Or would you have done exactly what she did and walked away for good? Tell me honestly in the comments, because your answer says a lot about what you believe people deserve after they hurt you. And if this story touched you, if it made you think or reminded you of your own strength, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Because sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that finally set you free.